Welcome to Big Little Stories. I'm Ivy Sharmetz. My guest today is someone who knows how to tell stories that matter, whether they're coming from the White House, the workplace, or the heart. Ben Feller is the former chief White House correspondent for the Associated Press, where he covered Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush. Today, he helps other people tell stories that matter, and he's the author of a beautiful children's book called Big Problems, Little Problems. That's all about perspective, parenting, and finding calm in the chaos. Thank you so much for being here, Ben.
Ivy, thanks for having me. I think this was meant to be. I know we missed each other at Mercury, but for the host of Big Little Stories to have on Big Problem, Little Problems, it feels right. Thanks for having me.
Well, and I love talking to people who love to tell good stories because you and I have talked about how important that is, and I want to talk about the book, but first, I feel like I have to start with just talking about your incredible career as a journalist. I know a lot of people always want to talk to you about that. Did you always know you wanted to be a journalist? Was that something that was always in you?
No, not at all. It would be great if the answer to that question was yes, but I was a college student at Penn State, the school where I grew up, and I was having a great time and getting good grades and just mostly having fun. And then I studied abroad as a junior, and I came back as a senior. I was a psychology major, and I thought I wasn't really enjoying it very much. I didn't feel like I was getting any traction. And I thought, I better have some skills that I could take into the workplace when I graduated, because it's pretty important that I get paid at some point. And I just started reflecting based on my experience of being abroad and seeing the world, what really matters to me? What am I excited about? What am I passionate about? And it brought me back to writing, which is something that had been a personal interest, but nothing that I thought I would pursue. And so I switched into journalism very late in my college career. It took me a little longer to finish. But by the time I graduated, I was a pretty focused person and really driven to get into it. And that launched a 20-year journalism career. So I came to it a little bit late, but it worked out.
So I'm going to do this kind of in fast motion here. So how do you go from the Center Daily Times in State College, Pennsylvania, to the News and Record in Greensboro, North Carolina, to the Tampa Tribune in Florida, to the White House? I think I did highlights? I don't know. Did I get all the highlights?
Yeah, no, you did that really well. A lot of work. I mean, every part of that journey that you just talked about led to the next one. And so in my first job, I was covering anything that they said needed to be covered. I was covering local parades and weather stories, and famously the start of bear hunting season in central Pennsylvania. But I covered a lot of local government. And then that got me to a slightly bigger job in central North Carolina, and then covering state government and politics in Florida. And at that point, I was about 30. And I realized, I want to move back up to the Northeast or close to it anyway. And that got me to the Associated Press national staff. I covered education and then the White House beat. So it was a methodical journey, even if I didn't know it at the time, because all of those years of chasing stories, working sources, developing trust, covering complex issues and trying to make them simpler for audiences, all of that led me to the chance to cover the White House.
So it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you, what is the difference, do you think, between covering a president and covering the lives of everyday people?
Well, when you're doing it well, which I really tried to do, some days better than others, covering presidents is covering the lives of everyday people.
That's true.
Because even though people think about my time covering the White House and they ask if I miss it, what they're thinking of is glamour, prestige, access, and all of that stuff was really cool, Ivy. But the reality was the job was covering politics and policy and decision making, figuring out what was happening and explaining it to millions and millions of people, some of whom voted for that president, some of whom didn't, and some really didn't care about what was happening in Washington. But my job was to make it matter to the American public, and that always animated my thinking. That's why I loved journalism, is that I wasn't writing for my editors or for my competitors, or certainly for the sources. I was writing for real people. And the way that you do that is you think like a real person.
Yeah.
How would this budget vote affect me? How would this policy decision of this visit from the Chinese leader have anything to do with my life? And if you keep that as your prism, you start writing for and talking like and thinking like a real person. And that's what I try to do every day.
Yeah, and you shaped a lot of the national conversation through the work that you did and the stories that you broke and your time doing that. So thank you for your service. I'll say that. I'll say that too. But so I mentioned you're a consultant. You eventually left journalism. What made you decide to do that? As someone who did that myself, I'm always curious to hear what made other people make that decision.
I appreciate the question. And again, I love it if my story was so sort of sophisticated and sequential. Like I did this and then I was ready to do this. A lot of life in parenting, like I covered in the book, is just trial and error. I just knew after 20 years of the glory and the grind of journalism, I was ready to do something different. It was not a decision that my boss at the White House totally understood, because the front seat to history was like the Willy Wonka golden ticket. But I was ready, and when I left journalism, I didn't have the next thing lined up, and I decided to explore. Was I going to go to work for foundations or nonprofit? Was I going to go to work for the National Football League or something that I had a personal interest in? Was I going to go into teaching? And all of a sudden I realized, this is kind of fun, because for the first time since college, I'm exploring, what do I want to do next? And of all the choices and opportunities, going into strategic advice and counseling was the one that stood out, because after all those years, Ivy, of knocking down the door, or at least knocking on the door to try to get in the room, I was hired to be in the room. And they would say, Ben, we have to figure out, we've got some tricky challenge. We don't know how to talk about it. We don't know how to think about it. Can you help us, since you've lived in the fire for so long? And to me, that was really exciting. But there was definitely a transition there, especially the first year, because I identified myself like in my soul as a journalist. Yep. And you have to kind of realize there is life after this, and going to business was the path that worked for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned we just missed each other at Mercury. You left right before I joined Mercury, but your
that was my bad. I'm glad I found you.
But your reputation, is still there as someone who I was told that you are someone that I would have very much enjoyed working with. So I was very grateful when we were able to connect. So let's talk about the book for a second, because your son Sam was 4 years old at the time when you got the idea to write the book. What gave you the idea to write the book?
Well, I'm really passionate about being a dad, and I think if you look at the conversation, generally speaking, about parenting, there are stereotypes, fair or not, about the roles that dads play. And I always wanted to be a very active dad, and that takes on different meanings. But when I mean active, thinking about his friends, thinking about his homework, his care, his doctor's appointments, his emotional needs, right? All of those things I thought were not the role of a mom or a dad. Those are just roles of parents. And I would be stopped sometimes by people who would say, like, I don't see any other dads doing these things. I took father-son trips with Sam, and people would say, like, where's the mom? I'm like, what? I don't know that anybody would say that, like, where's the dad? In fact, even in the book, sometimes people read it and they were looking for the mom. And it's like, Sam has a great relationship with his mom, amazing relationship. But what I don't think somebody would read a book about a mother and son and say, boy, the dad's present is absence. It's a weird thing for me to think about. So that was always in the back of my mind. And then when Sam and I would just have a pattern of helping him. I would try to help him solve problems by making them small. My instinct was to try to solve the problem myself, because I was always in a hurry. I'm still in a hurry. But I realized, if I fix the thing or say, don't get frustrated here, I'll just do it, it's not helping. It's only helping in the moment. But he's looking at my frustration. He's not learning anything from me. So I got down on one knee when he was really small. So we would look at each other eye to eye. We'd take a few deep breaths, because I know my son, and I just knew he needed to calm down. And then I would say, what's the problem? And he'd say, I can't figure out how to zipper my new sweatshirt. And so I'd say, you got to line up the grooves and see how that goes. And then he would smile, and then I unzipped it, and he got sad again. Why did you do that? You fixed the problem. I said, I want you to do it. And so he did it, and then he smiled, and I gave him a hug and a handshake, and he's like, what now? I'm like, that's it. Let's go. Don't you feel better? And so after a while, I'd say, is this a big problem or a little problem? And he understood the difference between those. And eventually they weren't problems at all, because he was doing it himself. And so over and over again, we did this. And I didn't think I had discovered anything. It was just what worked for us, until, Ivy, the day that I was stuck in traffic trying to get through the Holland Tunnel, and the light turned green, and we didn't move over and over again. And I could almost see my apartment in Brooklyn, but I couldn't get there. And I got so frustrated, and for a moment, I almost forgot that my son was in the car seat, and I just let loose with a string of profanities. And he goes, "Whoa, Daddy!" And I looked in the rearview mirror, and he goes, and I could see him do this. I could still picture him. He said, "Don't get frustrated. Is this a big problem, a little problem?" Yeah. And I thought, what a marvelous moment as a dad that he was listening, processing all the time, and how lucky am I that he taught it back to me
Yeah.
in that moment. And so that's when I decided to write the book, because I just felt that there was a lesson in there for other parents about how we can teach our kids, but also listen and learn from our kids.
And I read somewhere also that um, one of the things that you like about the book is that it kind of captures this time in your son's life, right? He was around 4 when you were writing it, and that you sort of have this book to preserve those moments. Talk to me about that. That kind of it's a very special added bonus, I think, of the book too for you.
Yeah, it's strange to be nostalgic about something that's still happening in real time, like talking with you about the book, and it's only a couple of years old, but he's changed so much.
Yeah.
He will turn 14 this summer, so we're talking about 10 years since the original idea. And he's, as a parent, you do start to think about these previous chapters when he didn't mind that I hugged him, that I wasn't just embarrassing kind of by talking or being around his friends, although I work on that really hard. But I did, when somebody asked me during this process, what's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Which is the right question, and something I talk about with clients all the time when they have something that's bothering them or they're moving in 5 different directions. I'm like, just tell me what your definition of success is. What problem are you trying to solve, or what's the dream that you want? I said, I would love it if the book gets published and it's illustrated beautifully, and I could hand it to my son, and one day we walk around the corner to a local bookstore and it's there, maybe even in the window, and all those things happen. And so I have to remember that too. Like, that was a really personal, but also professional goal I had. Like, this is something I want to do. Also tied into the pandemic and how lonely and stressful everybody was when a lot of this was taking place. And so I feel like, that's a really good goal. And I will always share that with Sam, because we sat at my kitchen table and I put my camera up and we ran a video, and I said, he looked at me to open the box. I said, you open the box. And it was the first time we saw the book.
Wow.
And he just looked at it, and the first thing he did was, just thinking about it, was instead of leafing through it and looking for it, he just looked up at me with this look like, we did it. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
It was so fun.
And since you mentioned that, and I know you literally just told me before we started taping this, so the illustrations in this book are gorgeous. Tell me how these illustrations came about.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. So the book was published by an imprint called Tilbury House, and they're part of the role of the publisher is to find the illustrator. So they sought out a woman named Merce Lopez, who lives in Spain, who had illustrated other books for their imprint. And she was interested. And it was really a learning process for me, because I've been in communications now for over 30 years, but I had never gone through this process. And so as a journalist, I had lots of questions, more than they liked. And I basically said, what happens now? And they said, we have to find the illustrator. And in so many words, now you wait patiently, because it takes a while. She had to finish a couple other projects. And but so there was a long period where I was sort of not seeing or feeling any action, but she was quietly working through her own process. And she used a bunch of photos that I had collected and kind of curated for her of different ways that to show Sam's life in school and with me. And what I didn't expect was that she was going to use them so literally, so that the clothes that Sam is wearing and the toys that are in the book and the image of us walking out into our daily life together in Brooklyn were all from the photos. So that made it even more special. And I still remember that sweatshirt that he has on in the book. And I think I kept it somewhere, because it's so, in that sense, it's like a moment in time. And, Sam and I did a TV interview about this, and the CBS wanted to have a surprise cameo from my son, but they had to tell me, because of course I needed to get permission. And I said, well, how's it going to be surprise if you tell me? And they said, well, I don't know. What do you think? I'm like, well, I'll just send them down the street to a neighbor, and they'll take a video and send it into you. So that was our compromise. So I didn't actually know what Sam was going to say, but as he was leaving, his glasses had broken, and he had duct tape in the corner. See, big problems, little problems. I'm like, well, that held them together until we can get some new ones. So he goes down the street to my friend who's going to take this video, and he calls me. And on the way down there, I said, Sam, this is going to be on national television. Do you want to practice at all? And he looks at me and he goes, Daddy, no offense, but this is my, like, I've lived this book, which I like.
Wow.
I think I know what I'm going to say. I'm like, okay. And then we get down there and my friend calls me and I'm like, okay, so maybe Sam did have a question after all. And he didn't. And it was my friend saying, yeah, so you want Sam's glasses on, right? And I'm like, yeah, of course. He can't see without them. He's like, but they got the duct tape. I'm like, I don't care. Like, what better shows the whole point of this? It's like, just keep solving problems. And I thought it was kind of endearing. So in that interview, when Sam popped up, there's this little boy talking about how important the book was to him. And he's got a big thing of duct tape. So, these little things stick with me.
I love that. We're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the lessons that are in the book and some of the through lines in there. So we'll take a quick break. We'll come right back. Ben, one of the kind of overarching themes in the book is the idea that when things are overwhelming, you kind of just pause, think about it, and before you react. And as someone who worked in a newsroom and you as a journalist to a much higher level, I kind of feel like that is a journalism skill that you developed. Is there an overlap there between what you learned in your professional life and how you were able to teach that to your son?
Yeah, maybe I didn't know it at the time, but it's easier to see in retrospect, and I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think that a lot of people start their daily life and they have a plan and they live by their calendar. And when something goes wrong, it knocks them sideways and kind of they're off kilter all day. The train is late, they spill their coffee, the technology doesn't work, all these things that happen. And I think over time, I've just begun to expect those things to happen. And so when they do, you're faster to the solution and you bring calm to a situation that could make other people rattled. I remember covering the White House, and one of the stories that was just so important to the AP was the State of the Union. And I think it was maybe my first time running solo as the chief correspondent on that story. And inexplicably, the State of the Union had leaked. Somebody got a copy of it, 20 minutes early and just started publishing a story. And so all of a sudden, the president hadn't even started speaking yet, and I was late. I'm like, I can't believe this. and my boss is like, just start writing. I'm like, well, I don't have a copy yet. And so then the White House was embarrassed and scrambled and lifted the embargo and sent out a copy to everybody. And I found out later that somebody in our newsroom, another reporter, was watching me that whole time and said, that was a really crappy situation for you to be in. And certainly not your fault that somehow it got out, but you just handled it with calm. Like, why were you not freaking out? And I'm like, well, it's an interesting question, the why, but I think I've just been preparing for moments like that. It doesn't mean that I don't freak out and I get frustrated a lot, but what's the point? Like the people who win most often, and I say win not just competitively, but take bigger problems and turn them into little ones, are ones that are just ready for those moments. And the more you do it, the more like, okay, let's take a deep breath and just attack it. And so that does affect how I raise my son. And he knows it by now. He knows the story by heart. But I could tell, Ivy, he has a patter to him. And he's like, hey, Daddy. And there's that little lilt in his voice. I'm like, there's a problem right now. What's up, buddy? He's like, it's just that. And I'm like, okay, he's going to get to it. And I guess I'm more ready now. I don't get apprehensive. Like, what's wrong? I only have 5 minutes to answer this. And it's just, no, what's going on? And when you bring the calm, they feel it too.
The three things that you talk about in the book are perspective, frustration, and patience. Why those three?
So first of all, it's important, I think, for young people to know that frustration it's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to understand what frustration is. It's life often does not go your way. The challenge is not how do I prevent that from happening? It's what do I do about it? When this happens, just what we were talking about, what do I do about it? But it's not really helpful for parents to kids, or frankly for grown-ups to each other, to say, don't get frustrated and just leave it at that, or calm down. We all know that that's not helpful and even condescending. So first of all, it's to say, frustration when things don't go your way and you've got that feeling in your chest, it's okay. So let's breathe and figure it out together. And that just makes it smaller. And then, teaching my son about patience and perspective. Patience is, you're not always get something right the first time. You might miss the train, you wait for another. It's not like your world and everyone else is living in it. You have to be patient for situations around you. And again, over time, the people who can demonstrate patience and grace when everybody else is not are the people that are going to generally be happier and probably be the people that you want to be around. And then finally, perspective is very hard for a young person to know. But perspective, you go through life and you feel like, I can handle this problem because it sure feels like the one from last month or 2 years ago, where you have a big win and you think the world is on your side. You're like, well, let's not get too high on ourselves. Or you have a big setback and you're like, I've had them before, and you're able to stay more in the middle. So those lessons for me matter. But what really brought it home for me was when Sam, that story I told about, when Sam read it back to me, he was giving me perspective. He basically said, we will get through this tunnel. Like, there's just no chance that we're going to stay at a red light overnight, right? We're going to get home. And like, yeah. So if we're going to get home, like, what's the big deal? I'm with you. We're in a car. We're safe. He was teaching me perspective. And I think that that's what parents and kids can often give to each other. So that's why I thought about those three the most.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, because the tone of the book, it's not condescending at all. It's an approach that's very loving and balanced, because as you said, it kind of goes both ways. You mentioned, when we started talking a little bit about fatherhood and what this book says about fatherhood. What do you want this book to say about fatherhood?
Well, I would love it if, first of all, at a most basic level, if people pick it up and smile and enjoy it and get to read it themselves or with their kids or anybody young in their family, like that just makes me feel great, because it is really about not just about the lessons, but bringing a little bit of levity and joy into the world. I speak a lot about how to make audiences care, which is the through line of my entire career. And I weave the book in at the end to tell this story and pull people back. And it's always refreshing to me, no matter how cynical or high-powered the audience. They go, aw, because they think of a dad and a son communicating together. But the other point, too, about fatherhood is just that, I still think that dads are working against a stereotype that doesn't work for them. It doesn't work for me. If Ivy, if you go to for people who still do this, if you go into a card store on Father's Day to buy a Father's Day card for, your dad or somebody else in your life, the choices are really embarrassing. They're basically like all the cards are dads as buffoons. I remember one from last year, and it said, the dad looks down and said, Steve, am I a good dad? And the son says, my name is Tom. I'm like, oh, I get it. It's like, okay, you're not going to find that on Mother's Day card, because the image is like we're distant, we're watching TV. If we do anything, we're taking them fishing. Like, no, fatherhood is planning and preparing and being present and being thoughtful and having social and emotional skills. And so part of what I want is for, that's not really what the book is about, but it's I guess maybe one theme is like, this is what dads are doing. They're doing it with love, and not because they have to, it's because they want to. Are
you going to write more? Are there more books coming?
I do have a couple other books in mind.
Okay.
So maybe this conversation will be the impetus for it, if I can come back.
Definitely. Do you miss Air Force One? Real quick, do you miss Air Force One?
I miss Air Force One every time I'm sitting at LaGuardia and they say we're eighth. We're eighth for departure.
That's fair. Ben, how can people find out more about you, get in touch with you? Get the book?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. If you want to get the book, it has its own website, bigproblemslittleproblems.com. It's also available Amazon or wherever you like to buy your books. Very easy to find.
Ben, we end each show with something we call 3 big little questions. We'll do them rapid fire.
Yes,
you ready?
Perfect. I am ready.
How do you get yourself out of a bad mood?
Talk to my son.
What is your go-to karaoke song?
Oh, it's been a while, Ivy. I'm going to say Living on a Prayer and Not Very Well. I love that song.
This one's going to be tricky because you're not from New Jersey, but do you have a favorite spot in New Jersey or a favorite place you like to go to in New Jersey?
Oh, yeah, not that tricky. I mean, Sam and I have gone to Point Pleasant.
Jenks.
Yeah, and walked along the boardwalk, and I know it's rapid fire, but I'll tell the story in 15 seconds. There's a game there where you hang on a bar. Have you ever seen this?
Yes.
And then they raise the bar off the ground. Mm-hmm. And this huge bodybuilder guy went and did it for, I think, like 27 seconds. And my son said, well, you're going to do it, right? I'm like, well, you didn't make it to 30 seconds. Like, look at the arms on that guy. And so I went, and I ended up hanging on there for over a minute. But I was facing the toys that they give you as prize. There was no clock, and the whole place was quiet. And I was like, nobody's cheering or saying, hang in there, or you've done it. And so finally, when my arms had no feeling left, I dropped. And it turns out it was over a minute. And I turned around, and there was a whole crowd of people, like 30 people had joined in that 1 minute. And so they gave us this big prize. And Sam said, I'm like, are you proud? He's like, yeah, Daddy. Some guy walked up to me and said, is that your dad?
Wow.
Yeah. So for about 1 minute and 3 seconds in New Jersey, I was a hero.
What a humble brag, Ben. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time. I always enjoy talking to you. I appreciate it. The book is great. And just thanks for chatting with me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Ivy.
Thank you so much, Ben. And that will do it for today's Big Little Stories. Be sure to check us out on Instagram at Big Little Story Show. I'm Ivy Sharmetz. I'll talk to you next time.